In Our 10th Year by Simon Armitage. This poem deals with a couple whose relationship is entering its 10th year. We can see the word our there, which very much suggests that it's personal to these two people, that it's very much their love. Also, with the idea of it being our 10th year, we can see that it's 10 years have passed. Now, you can read this in its way. It's a very ambiguous poem. It can be read 2, 3, 4 very different ways. And in our 10th year, it can certainly indicate that idea that they have reached their 10th year and this is during it. Or perhaps it could be a reflection onto the past, looking back onto the 10th year. So if you believe that if you believe the poem's about a couple whose relationship has been difficult, but they've worked through it and ended up loving each other loads at the end, excellent. That means that it's obviously in our 10th year of being together. However, if you believe that actually it's looking back, it's a breakup, it's talking about love not in a positive way, you could argue that the title is almost reflecting back to that particular 10th year in the relationship and perhaps where it all went wrong. Now, firstly, we'll talk about the structure, which is really quite important. We see there's different line lengths, there's different lines per stanza, there's different rhyme scheme. It's all quite irregular, as you'll see through these slides. Now, it's roughly iambic that it's written in, because you've got this book, this page, this harebell laid to rest. Between these sheets, these leaves, if pressed, still bleeds, a watercolour of the way we were. So it's mostly written in iambs. You can see here the line lengths are different, so obviously it has different meters in it. We can see the first line has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet into the meter, which obviously makes it pentameter. If we look at the next line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, again pentameter, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the first stanza is written in iambic pentameter. Now, throughout the poem, this doesn't become quite as regular as you'll see. So what we can argue is that we've got, obviously, very quickly, we've got rest, obviously the rhyme scheme of A, bleeds, B, where, C. So although in this first stanza it's quite well structured, it's iambic pentameter, that could suggest that at that time possibly, or the time that they're looking at right now, their love is quite structured, it's logical. But as we see through the second and third stanzas, the varying line lengths, the different rhyme schemes within it, we can see that there's real confusion and anxiety about their love. If I just erase this, we'll just do a quick bit of analysis on it. So the idea of this book, this page, this harebell laid to rest is very important to it, because it gets repetition of the word this, this, this. It's being very particular to it. It's really saying to it that it's particular points that it's looking at. This book, this page, this harebell laid to rest. And the harebell itself is really quite significant. It can symbolise grief, it can symbolise submission, and it can also symbolise hope as well. It can be used in different ways. Different poems throughout the ages, as you'll see in later handouts, different poets have really focused on the harebell to represent different things. And again, if you believe it's a positive poem, then the harebell represents hope. If you believe it's a negative poem, you can say that it represents grief, submission, retirement. So the idea of the harebell is very important, and the idea there of it being laid to rest, there's a suggestion there of death. Obviously, if somebody's laid to rest, that's where they're laid in the grave possibly. Between these sheets, obviously sheets, there's ambiguous, there's the idea of the sheets of the book, or there's also the sheets of the marital bed where they go to bed together. And it tells us that these leaves, if pressed, still bleeds, a watercolour of the way we were. What we have here is we have some really incredible use of assonance here, the repetition of vowel sounds in words. Between these sheets, these leaves, if pressed, still bleeds. We've got 6 different examples there of assonance within that line. And that E, the repetition of that sound, again, depending how you want to analyse the poem, you can attribute it to possibly sounds of quite possibly moaning or problems, or perhaps a sexual union. It can be read in very many different ways. And the idea is, if it's pressed, the harebell can be a metaphor for the relationship, and the idea is, if it's pressed, if it's forced to, it still bleeds. And this has got a negative connotation, the idea of bleeds. Really, obviously, connotations of injury, pain, death. But the idea of it being a watercolour of the way we were. Now again, it's looking at the book at the time. You could read it that it's a watercolour of the way we were when the times were good, or quite possibly you could quite simply read it, have it that the harebell, as it's pressed closely together, it begins to bleed and it leaves a watercolour, a very beautiful type of painting or style of painting. It leaves that within the pages. The blank pages of the book are being filled by the watercolour that's coming out of the harebell that represents their love, or however else you wish to analyse it. In stanza 2, we begin to find out a bit more about the relationship, about what the past 10 years have been like. We have this very particular those years, and then the use of the colon there to tell us more about what those years were like. Saying the way that it's structured, those years has quite negative connotations. It's the idea of those years. And then the colon can introduce, it's going to be a list, which we can see it is. The colon introduces a list. And we can see within this a lot of repetition. The fuss of such and such a day, which suggests that the days become irrelevant. Although we're later told that there's dates being kept, the days to this speaker have become irrelevant. Because possibly, it's because now at the end of the day they realise how much they love each other, therefore it doesn't matter. Or you could read it that the speaker quite simply is not bothered. The speaker is reflecting back on this experience and just with a real feeling of that day, that's such and such a day. That disagreement and its final word. Its final word, that disagreement is obviously referencing a particular disagreement they've had, and its final word, obviously a final word was said by one party, presumably going on a breakup or something along those lines. It then directly goes on and accuses the other person of your inventory, your list of names and dates and times. And again, the repetition of the word "and" there really suggests that the speaker is bored. It's your inventory, your list of names and dates and times really suggests that it's boring to the speaker. Whereas obviously at the same time, whoever it is that's written this inventory of names and dates and times, they're very important. These names and dates and times of presumably when their lover has gone off and had an affair, these are really important to that person. It's really bothered them. And again, the suggestion is that the speaker's just dismissing this by saying the names and dates and times. The speaker then goes on to tell us about my infantries, my armies of tall, dark, handsome lies. The idea there that the lies are tall, dark and handsome, there's obviously, if you want to read it as a female speaker, that's really interesting because usually it's men. If a woman's getting hooked up on a date, a blind date, they might be told that they're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome man. So it's very much a masculine word, handsome, and we usually, or almost exclusively, relate it to men, of men who are seen as being handsome. And again, my infantries of tall, dark, handsome lies, there's a real suggestion that the speaker is proud. The speaker is quite proud of his tall, or her tall, dark, handsome lies. Almost as if in some way the other person in the relationship deserved it. They deserved to have these tall, dark, handsome lies, those affairs. They deserved it. Simple as that. Now, what it also goes on to say really is that it says that the lies themselves, again, it seems like if you want to read it as a male, either if it's male or female. There's certainly a suggestion, because you've got the names and dates and times, tall, dark, handsome, lies, that these lies, these dates, these times have been going on over a period of time. And also the person, the other lover in the relationship, has been aware of them. They've obviously, or we think they probably haven't confronted the speaker of the poem about it. And so it's been going on for quite a while. Stanzas 3 and 4 are here. I've put them together. Quite simply, I couldn't get them in separate slides, so they're on one. They are separate stanzas, okay? Stanza 3, this one here, we see another 4-line stanza. Again, see how the first stanza was 3 lines, the second one was 4, third one was 4, and the fifth one, and the fourth one here is 3 lines. That's quite important. Again, it really echoes the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, the roller coaster ride that seems to have been their relationship. There's no sense to it. I've taught you poetry is very much it's an art form, but there's a lot of rules to it, techniques that we apply. Poets, as I've also told you, love to break the rules, and this kind of breaking of the poetic rules really suggests a up and downness, a rebellion, a relationship fraught with problems. We very quickly just look at the feet and meter here. The form of it, we can see a decade on. Now we astound ourselves. So again, we've got a decade on. Now we astound ourselves. Again, we've not got the iamb here. The iamb is certainly not working. Stanza 1, we saw it nice and easy. Now we see it really not making so much sense. We go down to the second line there. We could say, we would say, still two, still twinned, but doubled, now with love. Again, there's no constant, there's no real constantness there. If we look at it, we've got unstressed, stressed, so still two, still twinned, doubled, but doubled, now with love. So again, it kind of goes into that iambic pentameter idea again, and we see here how sure we are each of the other half. And again, we do see iambs here and here, but we see it change there. See 2 unstressed syllables there. It really doesn't follow such a constant idea. It is mostly iambic pentameter. However, there are problems with this. If you argue that the relationship is strong, you would say that the relationship's strong, but there are significant errors within its structure, the formation of the relationship, just like the poem. The poem is mostly iambic pentameter, it is mostly strong iambic pentameter. However, the weaknesses in it, where it changes its stressed, unstressed syllables, changes its feet, the weaknesses in that really highlight the weaknesses in the relationship. So I'm just going to erase this and look at a couple of things within this third stanza here. Now it's really interesting. This is where obviously it's going back to present day basically. It tells us a decade on, now we astound ourselves, still two, still twinned, but doubled now with love. Now, just these 2 lines here are really interesting. It's telling us that 10 years later on, but now we astound ourselves. We absolutely amaze ourselves. We can't believe we're still together. Or if you believe, you could even say that looking back on that 10 years, they can't believe they stayed together for so long and they're glad it's over. It really is down to how you want to interpret the poem. It's completely up to you. There's unintentionally, on purpose, there's numerous different meanings. So this idea of still two, still twinned, but doubled now with love. The idea of being twinned is 2 identical. It suggests that they are both identical. You could even read this, go back into the previous stanza with my inventories of names and dates and times. Sorry, with your inventories of names and dates and times, and my inventories of tall, dark, handsome lies. If they're identical, as was being suggested, twinned here, the names and dates and times may actually be lovers of the woman herself. You can read it that way. But the idea is very much that they're still twinned, they're still two. It really emphasises, or you can read that it's really emphasising the strength of their bond. And note also how he tells us, but doubled now with love. Doubled now with love. It suggests that their love is even stronger, or much stronger than it was before. It might even suggest beforehand they hadn't even been in love. It's really an interesting word, but again, it certainly suggests it's not always been good and it's not always been so full of love. Now, we get into this bit here, possibly the most confusing lines, especially if you are arguing that the poem is in a negative way. Okay, let's just look at these two lines here. We see here that still two, still twin, but doubled now with love, and for a single night apart, alone. Now, this is an interesting, very interesting use of punctuation here. Okay, what we call this a cesura. Cesura is a lovely word, sounds really nice. All it means is it's punctuation within a line of poetry. A cesura is punctuation within a line of poetry. So therefore we see cesura there, we see it there, 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 there. So it's punctuation to full stops, semicolons, full stops, semicolons, and commas all function as cesura. Colons as well, you can say, are as well. So we can see there, it's these within the middle of a line, or within a line itself, not at the end. We call it cesura, and it changes the pace of the poem. It forces us to stop. What it also does, if we look at this bit here, at these lines here, the cesura there of apart, it really isolates that word alone. It really emphasises it. It really makes it stand out and makes us pause for a second on it. It's almost, if you believe that it's a positive poem, it suggests there that the alone is real separateness. It really is alone. That word alone, because of this cesura here, the comma, is quite literally separate from the rest of the line. And it's really a creative way of it to work. It really draws the eye to its lonely presence. It really makes you look directly at that word itself. And it goes on to tell us that how sure we are each of the other half. And again, two halves obviously make a whole. So it's the idea that they're one, they're identical. Although they're two, they're one body, one flesh. Finally, we go on to this stanza here, the very final one. Goes back to the harebell. There's repetition there. It links back to the first stanza of 3 lines. It tells us about the harebell. It's as if they're now looking at this harebell again. And it's telling us, perhaps like the relationship, it holds its own. It's able to survive by itself. He then tells us, or tells his lover, let's give it now. Let's give it now in air with light, the chance to fade, to fold. This idea here, I'm just going to erase the cesura. This idea here, I'll say it one more time. This idea of air, of light, these are both life-giving ideas. It's giving the idea to breathe air, to breathe light back into the relationship. But there's also a suggestion there with this idea of air that they couldn't breathe before. The idea they were suffocated, they were smothered by each other. There was no room to move. It was dark beforehand. So there's an idea that now it's saying let's give it now in air with light. It's a new start, it's a new beginning. Perhaps after these 10 years, actually the couple are marking the next decade in their relationship, and they're looking not to make the same mistakes again. But again, it's very, very honest. It goes on to tell us, let's give it now in air with light, the chance to fade, to fold. It's as if the speaker is saying, look, let's go for the next 10 years. You've made your mistakes, or I've made my mistakes. Either way, we've had mistakes, we've had problems in the past. Just like the meter and rhyme of it, it's not been constant of the poem, it's been all over the place. But perhaps now, let's give it air, let's give it space, let's give it a chance to live. We're giving air and light, two life-giving properties. We're bringing them to our relationship and giving it a chance. But however, it doesn't say the chance to survive and to be excellent, it says the chance to fade, to fold. Very interesting contrast there, a real juxtaposition of ideas, and it's entirely down to you how you want to analyse that and how you want to interpret it. Finally, the final line of the poem, we get here, take it from my hand. Now, let it go. Now this idea that it's saying let it go, let's give it a go, let's give it a shot. We don't know if it's going to be great or not the next 10 years. We're going to try and make sure that it's better than the previous 10 years, but there's a chance that it might not. But that's life. Let's just try to make it work and to allow us to survive together, to have life with each other. Now, finally, the real idea of the poem is that Armitage, the poet, Simon Armitage, he really is just saying that the bonds which tie us in love always change. Just like the poem, the structure, the meter, the feet, and everything like that. The bonds that we have when we're in love, the relationship, they are ever changing. And they're shifted by the force of time, and therefore they can't be kept down. They can't be pinned down to the grub, kept still or constant. They've got to just quite simply go with the time. Just like the poem, it changes, things change. They might not be together in 10 years' time, but fingers crossed they will be. Either way, they're making a real resolution to try. Or perhaps, again, you can read it that it's quite simply, it's 10 years on, and they're sure of the other half, how sure we are each of the other half. Perhaps there you could argue, if you wanted to, that they're sure that the best decision was to break the relationship up in its 10th year. As I said, if you believe they're looking back on it, you read it like that. If you believe that they're giving it one last shot, they're giving it a real opportunity, how sure we are each of the other half really just emphasises how sure they are of each other. It's not meant to be confusing, I'm simply trying to give you lots of different ways that you can analyse the poem. To be getting good grades or good grades in your exams in English, A's, B's, you really need to be analysing by yourself. You've really got to show the examiner, not only have I understood what this poem means, I understand it on a metaphorical level, and I understand the different ambiguous meanings of the words and how it changes my opinion and ideas, and also be able to comment on the effectiveness of the poem and the way that the poet has constructed it. I hope this helps, and it's a good idea as always to be pausing, rewinding, going back to anything that doesn't make sense, and please make sure to ask me any questions in class if there's anything you don't understand.